What's going on, everyone? So I'm back today with another deck tech, and we are talking Boba Blue today. So after I built my Vader Blue deck in person, one of the things that I was constantly thinking about is how can I adapt this to potentially Boba Fett? As one of the strengths of Vader Blue is the fact that you get this really powerful leader and you're able to kind of stabilize after your super laser blast and then control the battlefield with your Vader. However, I figured, well, red is kind of a supplementary color, right? You're mainly focused on your blue cards, right? Vigilance, Super Laser Blast, these are cards that really carry the game. So I could just take that core package, pair it with Boba Fett, a far more powerful leader that comes down way earlier, allowing you to potentially get to that later stages of the game, while also potentially just becoming a very powerful mid-range beatdown deck with Boba. And that's exactly what we've done today, and it is extremely powerful. We're going to showcase some games today. If you want to pick up any of the cards in this list or just check out the list in general, I'll have a link to the list as well as my TCG player link in the description down below. Be sure to use it. It helps me out and it helps you out. Thank you all. Let's dive into Boba Fett, talk about why Boba and why blue first off here. So I think this one's a pretty self-explanatory one for those of you that have been following the channel and following the overall landscape of Star Wars Unlimited. But yes, the ability of readying resources is extremely strong. And in some cases, we are going to be leveraging that. But for the most part, the reason why we're running Boba Fett is not necessarily for the extra resources when, we're removing things. We could do things like, waylay on 5 resources, to power the dark side as well, which is a nice little turn. We could also, do things like, okay, on turn 3, we get to go ahead and waylay plus surprise strike, or, even restock with the extra 1 resource that we have. But for the most part, it's all about the Boba backside here in 5 resource to deploy, 4/7. The amount of stats on this guy, and that is also when we're getting a meaningful amount of resources, really allows us to stabilize in the game and potentially get to the later game where we can deploy some of our high-end threats or leverage our more powerful events. Or we could just end up being the beatdown deck and just destroy our opponent, because we are still playing our core Boba cards that really allow us to get in a ton of damage. Why blue? Well, I mentioned this before, but Vigilance, I think, is the most powerful double aspect card in the game by a large amount. It gives you a lot of game against, control decks as well as aggro decks. So it really allows you to turn Boba green, which kind of suffers in the control matchup, but dominates the aggro matchup, into this version of Boba, which doesn't dominate aggro as hard, even though Vigilance is really good, but allows you to have a much more convincing game in the control matchups and have a better matchup there, while also doing pretty well in the mid-range matchup. So it's one of the reasons why we're pairing it with blue, and I've been really impressed. Let's not waste any time and talk about the main portion of the deck, which is the events here. Now, although we have a lot of events, I would definitely call this more of a soft control, sort of like Iden Green, Krennic Green, or even more of a mid-range deck rather than a control deck. And so while we have a lot of removal spells, we can definitely play the beatdown role quite a bit. Starting us off here, though, we have 1 copy of Restock. I just believe that this card is extremely powerful, and one of the only ways where mid-range decks and some decks in general can even compete against the control matchup. This allows us to really have a nice game 1 with just a single copy in the main deck, which is not really that high of an opportunity cost. Of course, it's not going to do much in the mid-range or aggro matchup for the most part, because you're not going to get to the mill out point, but against control, it is so important to have one of these in the main deck. Surprise Strike, 2 copies. This helps us trade some of our early game units into some of the more powerful units in the middling parts of the game, or just get in for a lot of damage. Again, we can assume the beatdown role and assume the aggro role, and the Surprise Strike does help us out there. 1 copy of I Am Your Father. This acts as like another sort of removal spell, but oftentimes it's going to be a draw 3 in the later stages of the game. 2 copies of Waylay. We have a lot of high quality blue removal spells, or vigilance removal spells, so I decided to only go with the 2 copies of Waylay, as I do like the 3 resource cost removal spells, as it allows you to really leverage some of the extra resources that you're getting. And so I don't mind having a couple copies, but I think 2 is the right amount. Power of the Dark Side, 3 copies of this. This is just the most powerful villainy removal spell by a large margin, with the exception of maybe like Super Laser Blast. But one is like an early game one, the other one's like a late game stabilizer. So 3 copies of Power of the Dark Side really helps you kind of control the earlier stages of the game and potentially, power the dark side into like a Greedo, which is really, really nice. 2 copies of Make an Opening. This is really nice against like crafty smugglers, Viper probe droids, 7th Fleet Defenders, really just against Boba in general, it's quite good. So 2 copies of Make an Opening. 3 copies of Takedown. This one is kind of like quintessential vigilance removal spell, but while it does do some really nice work in the early game, we also want to pair it with Vanquish, which these 2 are kind of the vigilance removal spells. And we are running 2 copies of Vanquish. I think this card's gotten up a lot in value. It can deal with, some things that we've seen in the meta a lot. Things like Fett's Fire Spray, for example, could not have been Takedown. Vanquish does kill it, which is quite nice. But more importantly, it kills things like Avenger, where previously you would not have had an answer to it. So besides like bouncing it with Waylay, which doesn't really do a whole lot to help you in some scenarios. We have 1 copy of Cunning. Now, why 1 when a lot of lists are running 2 or 3? Well, we're not actually situated as the aggro tempo list initially. We can assume that role, as I mentioned, but Cunning, generally speaking, works best in the I want to push as much damage as possible as early as possible by exhausting your units, bouncing units, and giving +4/+0. And again, we can do that. This works just really well against aggro decks. It helps us race, which is why there's 1 in the main deck. And, well, as we talk about in the sideboard, 1 in the sideboard. The main event that we want to pair with this deck in terms of double aspect events is the Vigilance, right? As this allows us to kind of stabilize against aggro and potentially give us game against those control matchups. The discard 6 cards from an opponent's deck, heal 5 damage from the base, are oftentimes the 2 most important modes on this. Now, of course, defeat a unit is extremely relevant, and giving a shield token to Boba is also really, really good. Finally, we have 2 copies of Super Laser Blast. Now, I've tried different variations of this list. I've tried 1 copy of Search Your Feelings, 1 copy of Super Laser Blast. I've tried 2 copies of Super Laser Blast. I've tried the full 3 of Super Laser Blast. What I found with Super Laser Blast is this works really nicely against the mid-range matchups. So when you're fighting like Luke Green, or you're fighting Vader Green, these matchups really, really allow you to take advantage of Super Laser Blast, because when they deploy like Vaders and a couple of units, this is the way you get back in the game, and then you can finish them out with Avenger. In the aggro matchup, Super Laser Blast isn't extremely relevant. The game is going to be over by turn 7. It's almost never a situation where you're going to be able to get to Super Laser Blast at all. On top of that, you're going to find that, well, in your control matchup, Super Laser Blast isn't really that relevant either. And so it's really there to give us that final nail in the coffin against the mid-range matchups, and does have some niche uses outside of that. So I think the 2 Super Laser Blast, or 1 Search Your Feelings, 1 Super Laser Blast, is kind of the ideal portion for this deck, as we don't need that much help against mid-range matchups, but it does help to have at least 1 or 2 as kind of like your ace in the hole. So that rounds out the events here. Let's talk about our ground units, which are also quite large. So the first ground unit we got is 3 copies of Greedo. Just a 3/1, allows you to really get in some nice trades in the early game, and we actually have a really, really high chance of being able to flip an event, as you can see. And so this oftentimes can deal with 2 units at once. If they play like a Sabine, or, well, maybe not necessarily Sabine into something else, but if they play like a Viper probe droid and, I don't know, like another Viper probe droid, you can take out both of them, which can be quite nice with Greedo. But oftentimes it just gives you a nice little play with the additional resource that you can, use after like Power the Dark Siding, which is quite cool. And also another turn 1 play, which we don't have that many of, but we don't need that many of. 3 copies of Viper Probe Droid. This gives us some information about our opponent's hand, which does work well with all of our events and reactive spells, reactive events and such, but also just a nice little ground unit that you can play on turn 1. 2 copies of Death Trooper, rather. This is really, really good against a lot of, well, specific decks that have the 2 toughness clause on their early game units. This killing a Greedo can be really good. This killing a Viper Probe Droid gives you insane value. This, finishing off something after attacking with Greedo can give you nice value. So the reason there's only 2 of them, as some matchups it's like whatever, mediocre, and in some matchups it's absurd. So we'll have to, adjust that as we go into some of the games, of course, with our sideboard. 3 copies of Boba Fett, one of the reasons to be in Cunning Villainy. This guy is absolutely amazing, and it does work well with Cunning as a spell, but as an event here. But to be honest, this just gives you a lot of pressure. If your opponent just attacks you and ignores Boba Fett, well, Boba Fett can oftentimes just kill off their units repeatedly, and it's just a 3 power, 3 cost unit. It's just going to get in for a lot of damage if you don't deal with it immediately. Lastly, on our top end of the ground units, we have 3 copies of Bosk and 2 copies of Gideon. The 3 copies of Bosk, this just ends up killing so many things in the aggro matchup that we need to, okay? K2SO, Saw Gerrera, if that's something that pops up. It's going to kill General Dodonna. It's going to kill all these different things that you're going to commonly see in the aggro matchup for heroism. That Bosk is extremely relevant. Not only that, but in a lot of situations, right, we can, combo with all the events that we're playing to deal some extra damage. And it's also just a 4 powered unit, which is really, really nice. Also, 2 copies of Gideon. This might even be more impressive in our deck as we defeat a lot of units. Unlike, Boba Green or anything like that, of course, you can't play Gideon and Boba Green unless you want to play a 7 cost Gideon. You're not actually bouncing a ton of units. You're just killing them straight up. And so Gideon can turn Boba Fett from a 4/7, which is already absurd stats, right? You deploy Boba, you get down Gideon, or in some cases, you can even kill something, get down Gideon after, readying up some resources, which is really, really cool, and then control the field. But essentially, get down Gideon, deploy Boba, maybe you attack into their units with Boba Fett that you already had on the battlefield, like a mini Boba, and so you can ready up a resource, and you attack with Boba, you ready up another resource, and then you can power the dark side afterwards, which gives an experience token from Gideon, most likely to your Boba Fett leader, to keep the train rolling. And then you have so many removal spells: 3 copies Takedown, 2 copies Vanquish, 1 I Am Your Father, 3 copies Power the Dark Side, 3 copies Vigilance. Gideon makes Boba absurd in some games, and it's just unbeatable. You do want to put it on Boba, as oftentimes you're going to have some units like Greedos, Vipers, some space units lying around, so Power of the Dark Side won't kill it. And then, of course, they can't take down it, they can't vanquish it, and so that's where Boba ends up being extremely absurd, especially since, again, because Boba's base stats are so good, that Gideon just makes those base stats even more exaggerated and just takes over games sometimes. So really, really liked Gideon in this deck, especially since we are running so many hard removal spells. Let's talk about our space units next. Starting us off in the space category, we have 3 copies of Inferno 4. This allows us to round out our turn 1 plays for a total of 9 turn 1 plays, which is a decent number. Not that we are scrambling for a turn 1 play, but we do generally want to get something down in the earlier stages of the game, and Inferno 4 is one of the perfect ones, as you can set up your next few draws. We have 3 copies of Strafing Gunship. Now, this one might be a little bit strange. I know some people aren't 100% convinced by Strafing Gunship, and then there's some people that just think it's the best card in the game. In this specific deck, I've really appreciated it, as we are not, the tempo deck. We are not the aggro deck. And so Strafing Gunship doesn't really fit that well there, because one of the best things about it is that you can get some really nice value trades in the ground arena. Well, guess what? We are the soft control deck, and so this can go on the beatdown plan and hit your opponent, but can also kill things like Echo Base Defender. It can kill things like Sabine Wren. It can kill things like Fleet Lieutenant. It can kill things like Red 3. It can kill all those things, and in a lot of situations kill 2 to 3 different things because of the additional value you're getting from -2/-0 on ground units. So that's really important. 3 copies of Fett's Fire Spray. Guys, if you're going to play Boba, you're going to play Fett's Fire Spray. This card is just so ridiculous. It is just a 5/6 resources space unit that just beats down extremely, extremely quickly and can close games out very, very quickly. Don't ignore the exhaust and non-unique units. Also, that is something that has come up quite frequently for me, but it's not always, but it does come up, and so that can be something extremely relevant. And it also synergizes really nicely with Boba's actions, as you can defeat something and use the action as well to potentially exhaust something else. And then lastly, with 3 copies of Avenger. As I mentioned, this is a soft control deck. It's more mid-range focus. It's more trying to get to the later stages of the game rather than just kill your opponent straight up. And Avenger is one of the best late game win cons, as it comes down, is an 8/8, just beater in space, and it defeats things every single turn. This really closes out games, especially against the mid-range decks, but it also gives you some game against the green villainy decks who are running Relentless, as if they run Relentless and you can't deal with it, then you probably are going to lose the game very quickly. And so Avenger ends up dealing with those quite nicely as well. It also works really well with Gideon if he's on the battlefield. Although if you have Gideon and Avenger on the battlefield, I think you've won. I think you have won. That's gonna be the main deck. Let's talk about the sideboard, and then let's dive into some matches today. On to our sideboard here, and we have a couple of interesting ones that I want to talk about. Of course, we're gonna talk about all of them. First off, we have the Death Trooper 1 copy, as well as 1 copy of Syndicate Lackeys. I think both of these are kind of going into a very similar pool in which any sort of deck that has specific cards that you want to kill with these specific units, these cards come in. So for example, again, Viper Probe droids come in, maybe it gets like Boba Fett, Death Trooper's great against it. If they have Greedos, Death Trooper's great against that. Syndicate Lackeys particularly kill Sabine Leader. As soon as they comes down, they attack with it, assuming they don't have a Metal Ceremony to buff it up. The following turn, after you take initiative, because that's going to be a turn where they make a million actions, you can just Syndicate Lackeys away their Sabine, ready up a resource, ready up Boba, ready up 2 more resources after attacking, and then power the dark side something, and make Syndicate Lackeys a really appealing option. Additional copy of Restock. This is mainly for the control matchup, alongside 3 copies of Spark of Rebellion. Now, this is a single off aspect, but there are even control decks that are playing this as a double off aspect card. And guess what? It's worth it. 6 costed Spark of Rebellions are worth it. And the main reason is because of Restock. You're going to be pulling Restocks out of your opponent's hand and trying to get their Vigilances out of their hand so that you win the overall long mill game that these matchups tend to be. So against control, you're pulling out, of course, your like Death Troopers, maybe even your Gideons, you're pulling out Cunnings potentially, you're putting in Restocks, you're putting in Spark of Rebellions, and you're trying to go ahead and, rip their Restocks out of their hand and play the game that they are also playing, which you can do very well, as you also have 3 copies of Vigilance and you have 2 copies of Restock, and you could even go ahead and put pressure on them, which they can't really do to you. 1 copy of Cunning, as I mentioned, this is really good in the aggro decks, as you can just completely ruin their tempo and actually race them with the +4/+0 exhausting. It is just really powerful. This also isn't terrible. I mean, again, it's something you generally don't want to have, but you could make control decks discard a random card from their hand. It does come up every once in a while. Nothing that's like ridiculous or anything. It's not great, but it does happen. And then lastly, 3 copies of Devotion. This is a card that's specifically, again, for those aggro matchups. We have so many early creatures, early units, I should say. Putting this on a strafing gunship, putting this on like an Inferno 4, putting this on like a Viper Probe droid, all of which are really good. The one that I most like is that strafing gunship, as it gives an extra stat point, which can start killing 4 toughness units, such as K2SO, General Dodonna. You can kill 2 of those things and still live, and you can kill a 3rd one, and then you restore a bunch as well. So Devotion, really nice in this deck, especially since we have a lot of units for this to be applied to. Overall, it's pretty sweet. It has a really nice game against those control matchups, which normally, Boba Green can struggle in some cases. It has a really good game against aggro matchups with Vigilances and just early game pressure. And it also has some good game against mid-range with, Super Laser Blasts and, potentially even in some cases you can mill them out if they're like a really slow mid-range deck. But this is one of the adaptations of Boba that I've been playing with, and Boba's just so strong, you really can't go wrong with having Boba Fett as your leader. Without further ado, let's dive into some games today. So jumping into our first match here, it looks like we're against Thrawn Blue, so most likely a control deck, and we have our 1 copy of Restock in hand, so I'm not going to mulligan this for fear of them vigilancing away our Restock. I'm almost certain that this is going to be, something where Restock is relevant, assuming that they are playing a control deck, which normally you don't play Thrawn unless you are, but this looks like a pretty good hand for us. Waylay, Surprise Strike, not super great normally. Viper Probe Droid, however, does look pretty decent. I think in this spot, I'd rather keep the Super Laser Blast over, Surprise Strike and Waylay, as we might be able to get a decent amount of value a little bit later on. So let's go ahead and just look at what they've got. Power the Dark Side, Super Laser Blast, Waylay. Yep. Very happy I kept Restock in hand, and we're just going to be able to take initiative or pass after they take initiative here. And they could power the dark side me on my Viper Probe droid and then, you know, start hitting me down with a Greedo. But I don't think life total is going to be extremely relevant here. So I'm totally fine taking a little bit of damage off the earlier stages of the game, even though, you know, we could have like potentially waylaid their Greedo back to their hand. It doesn't really do too much. It just saves us a little bit of health, and, you know, we can do a little bit better than that, I think. There's a power of the dark side. I think here, I'd rather just resource the strafing gunship. They might just trade with the Viper Probe droid, to be honest. We know that they have Super Laser Blast, Power of the Dark Side, Waylay in hand. They probably resourced a Waylay, and we're just going to go ahead and hit base here. If they want to hit base, we're going to hit base. They know what we drew, so yep, I'm just going to claim initiative. I see no reason not to. There's a Greedo, there's an Inferno 4. I think Greedo is going to be the least important, impactful of these. I'm just going to go ahead and resource that and see if we can drop an Inferno 4 here. Just attack their base. Playing against the control mirror, it's really not that big of a deal. We could just go ahead and we're going to top those. We could just go ahead and play the you know, passive game of just beating in a little bit at a time. They're going to claim initiative. We're going to pass here, and yeah, I'm totally fine with that. Looks like they're going to look at the top card of my deck and see what we got. Do I want to resource a Super Laser Blast in this spot? Probably. We have Fet's Fire Spray Bosk to kind of deal with a bunch of different threats here. And System Patrol Craft. Okay. Let's just go ahead and hit their base for 3 here. We're going to go ahead and Bosk, kill their Greedo. I did this beforehand because there's a very good chance they're going to hit a non-unit and potentially kill our Viper Probe droid. They definitely should not have killed Viper Probe droid in that spot. They should have killed off my Bosk, but that is totally fine. We're going to flip Boba, hit in Power of the Dark Side away there. Power of the Dark Side away there, System Patrol Craft, hit in for 2, and now we put pressure on our opponent, a lot of pressure on our opponent, to where they can't Super Laser Blast at this point in time. And now we're going to be able to deploy a Fet's Fire Spray after, you know, doing all this great stuff, and they probably can't deal with Boba Fett. They could have an entrenched Power of the Dark Side. Yeah, we'll defeat our Inferno 4 here. We will keep both of those on top because it's going to be a lot of damage coming in, and, well, hit in with Boss because that's probably going to be the next one to go. Power of the Dark Side, let's get rid of Boss. Hit in with Boba Fett, and look at this. As I mentioned, we are definitely getting in a lot of damage here. So they're going to attack, potentially, you know, reveal something that might exhaust Fet's Fire Spray. We're going to attack in for 5, and look at that. They are on 2 HP. So they need something pretty good here in order for them to survive at this point. We have a Surprise Strike in hand. I'm going to go and resource a Greedo. They need, like, what can they have here? I'm not even sure what they could have here to keep themselves alive. They hit into, oh, they could exhaust by Fet's Fire Spray with Thrawn, and well, that doesn't even work either. We just killed him. All right, as you saw, restock would have been good in this matchup, so would Vigilance, but we assumed the beatdown rule, and we were just able to destroy our opponent straight up. And that's one of the power of the deck. Unlike, you know, other traditional hard control decks, or even soft control like Iden Green or Krennic Green, they just can't put as much pressure on the opponent as Boba Fett can. That turn where we were able to flip Boba, get in for damage, power the dark side away, their Sentinel, get in for more damage was insane. And of course, you know, that's just typical Boba turns, but that was really, really good. I don't think they should have, maybe they didn't have any other play, but deploying a unit allowed us to leverage additional resources, which was, you know, pretty unfortunate for them. So pretty nice little first showing. Of course, Thrawn Control isn't like a meta deck or anything, so I didn't expect to really have any troubles against it. But it's nice to see that we perform pretty well against it. Our next matchup is against Han Green. Now, this one can go a lot of different ways, depending on what build of Han Green they're running. This looks like a totally reasonable hand. Make an opening, strafing, gunship, both are pretty mediocre against Han. But, you know, getting some early units down is not too bad. If they're more like Casino Han, that really doesn't work too well against, you know, more controlling style of decks, and so we can go the more control route. If they're going to be a little bit more of an aggressive deck, then we can leverage, you know, the fact that we go a little bit bigger than them. We just need to survive until that point. And looks like they're going to be deploying a rogue operative out on turn 1 totally fine with me. We can do quite a few different things. Do we want to waylay that back to their hand? Do we want to just hit their base? Do we want to attack Rogue Operative and try to flip an event? I think the plan here is just to attack their base for 3. It gets a little bit of pressure in. We can see what they decide to do. They decide to attack base. We can go ahead and deploy our Boba Fett now. And we can take down the Rogue Operative on the next turn. We're really just behind 1 damage, and resupply is really, really good for them here, as they can now go ahead and potentially flip Boba or Han Solo next turn and do some nasty stuff here. We're going to claim initiative, and yeah, we're going to see what they decide to do. Vigilance is not a terrible draw. Avengers a little bit slow in this spot, so I'm going to just go ahead and kill off that. Here, I'm going to go ahead and take down the Rogue Operative. If they decide to action Boba, ready Boba, or Han, attack with Han to get to their 7-drop, we can actually just kill it straight up with our Boba. So they can't really do that. They're going to spark a rebellion, which means that they're probably not going to ready up Han in this turn, and they're going to get rid of a Vigilance. That's totally fine. We're going to attack in with Greedo. There's an Echo Base Defender. I think we'll just go ahead and take that trade right now, because if they action Han, ready up Han, attack my Boba, they're going to be down to 3 HP, and our Greedo can finish it off, so that doesn't look too great for them. They claimed initiative. We're going to pass. There's a Gideon. There's a Power of the Dark Side, all of which are very, very good. I think in this spot, I'd rather just resource the Waylay. They can action out Han, just deploy a 7 resource card, which would be pretty nice. Looks like they're going to do something like that now. What do we want to do here? Do we just want to attack in with Greedo? I think we do. There's Han. And I think in this spot, what do we want to do here? Power of the Dark Side looks pretty good. I think that's perfectly reasonable. We get rid of their leader. We get to ready a resource. We get to play Gideon after readying a Boba. They're going to take initiative. Ooh, yeah. All right. That is quite nice. I suppose it's a leader, so enemy unit didn't leave play this turn, so we don't get to ready up another resource. That's my bad. I forgot about that for a second, but doesn't really matter. I mean, we have 16 damage on their base. They are going to exhaust Boba Fett, our leader. Oh, they destroyed it. So they have Sentinel over here. What do I want to do? Do I want to Gideon? I kind of do. I mean, we could just attack 6. That's going to be 3, 19. All right, they're off it. They're done. They didn't want to wait for me to make a decision. And fair enough. I wanted to just make sure I went through all the steps and stuff, but not a bad game against Han Green. That was definitely more of aggro list. Homestead Militia is not normally something you see, so maybe it's just kind of what their own personal brew. But on to game number 3. Third game looks against Double Red IG, which these are some off meta stuff for sure. So we might do a few more games because these games have been pretty quick, but this looks like a great hand. IG is going to be an aggressive deck. Cunning is going to be great. Boba's going to be great. Greedo is going to be great. Making opening is probably going to be great as well. It's going to be difficult to figure out what I want to resource here. I think it's going to definitely be a Viper Probe Droid, as Greedo could potentially get that 2-for-1 little value. So I think I'd rather have that. And I think Bosk is also going to be the other one that I'd like to resource, as Make an Opening against Double Red IG is almost certainly going to get some value. And they look to be, they're going to be an aggressive deck here. So there's Wolf already, and Make an Opening looking pretty good. I'm not going to lie, guys. Not going to lie. They're going to take initiative. We are going to pass. And, there's another Greedo that we can easily just resource, as we are playing Make an Opening or Boba Fett this turn. They could just trade with my Greedo here. I'm kind of interested in seeing what they're going to do before we do anything. So I might just pass. And, if they play a unit that can get killed by a Greedo, I might just try to attack it and maybe kill Wolf with Greedo, as well as the unit I kill with Greedo. And then just to play a Boba Fett. I think that we have a little bit of some, all right, I guess we have an option to potentially wait. They're going to attack, so we can't heal. I'm going to pass here, because if they do nothing, I'm perfectly fine with that. If they do something, then we could potentially do a nice little value trade with our Greedo. Again, if they do nothing, I think they're immensely behind, because IG 88 comes down the same turn Boba Fett does, and Boba Fett just straight up kills IG, which is like really bad for that. Also, Bosk just straight up trades with IG as well, which is really, really nice. And we also have a cunning coming up on 6 resources, which is going to be looking quite nice here. We also have a make an opening, and they're going to claim initiative. Yep, totally fine with that. Honestly, it's going to look really nice for us in this spot. If they just keep hitting us for 3, I think that's totally fine with us. Make it opening, still looking pretty good. It doesn't necessarily kill or heal us because Wolf is on the battlefield. Do we want to pass this turn? I don't think we do. I think the play is not make an opening your Wolf, because we can't heal anything, so it doesn't really make a ton of sense to do that. Instead, I think we Greedo trade with Wolf, power the dark side, whatever they have here, and then we are really nicely set up for whatever they're going to deploy afterwards. I think I'm going to resource the surprise strike here. See what they got. And attack in. Yep. As I mentioned, I'm totally fine with kind of sitting back and letting them do what they want to do before we do anything, as we have a much more powerful kind of middle of the game. Assuming they're kind of building their IG deck to benefit from IG's leader ability. If not, then I don't know what they're doing over there. Let's see what they play here. Cantina Braggart. Okay, I'll just play a Boba Fett. I mean, Cantina Braggart is just like absolute garbage. We are not threatened by a Cantina Braggart, I will say that much. And that's exactly what I was saying earlier, is like, if they're like the aggressive deck and they're not deploying their threats, then we are in a very good spot, as we really don't have anything to worry about whatsoever. Now we can go ahead and potentially get some massive value this turn. Avengers looking pretty mediocre here. They're definitely the beatdown deck, and so I'm going to definitely try to trade with some units here. I would love to be able to go ahead and potentially like kill off something and ready up a resource. And I think with that in mind, I would like to kill off their 5th brother. So if we kill off their Cantina Braggart, we don't take the 2 damage, but this could potentially do 3 damage to us. I think killing a 5th brother off with Bosk, saving us an extra point of HP, and then being able to leverage the additional 2 resources we're going to get from Boba Fett here is going to be massive. And if they decide to deploy IG, sure, we'll just kill your Cantina Braggarts, and then they might be able to hit us for 5 with IG on the backside. But then we're going to be able to flip Boba, kill IG, and then kill whatever else they deployed afterwards, because we have power and make an opening in hand. And then we're going to have 3 units on the battlefield, all of which have decently high, toughness at that point, and they're going to have nothing. So I don't think, going ahead and deploying IG is going to be the way to go. I think you attack in with Cantina Braggart here. They just died into the Boba Fett. Okay. I'm going to ready up Boba Fett here, and I'm going to see what our opponent decides to do. Kind of strange. I did not expect to do that, for them to do that. I imagine they're thinking like, okay, if I'm not able to get rid of some of these cards, like, I'm just going to die so quickly. They could have like an aggression, but if they aggression where they're drawing a card and making or dealing 4 damage like a Bosk or a Boba Fett, that's not really that great either. They could deal 4 damage to our Boba Fett leader, and then we have to trade with their IG. Also, totally fine. Would be completely willing to do that. Again, they are the aggro deck. They need to be putting pressure on us, and well, they're not. So we can play the long game, as we have Gideon coming out next turn. They have a Starwing Scout. Okay. Yeah. Let's just go ahead and attack in with Boba Fett here. And then if they ready up an IG, then they're going to be, unfortunately, decently sad here. They played a Wolf. Okay. We'll just kill the Wolf. I'm totally fine with just killing the Wolf. And then we can power the dark side something. We can make an opening. I think we just make an opening here. And yeah, they get to draw 2. But oh, I guess we killed our the enemy with the Bosk trigger, and then I guess wait a second, that's that's actually pretty funny. I guess you have to play or have to make an opening your own creature because we didn't have a target. Makes sense. Because of the 2 damage from Bosk, but resource an Avenger here. We have Cunning in our hand. We could do some massive damage. They didn't deploy IG, obviously, because it dies to our Boba Fett basically immediately. We have Gideon. That's just going to give us a ton of value here. So not really sure what our opponent's going to do about all of this going on. And we're going to resource that Avenger, as I mentioned. They might have a bunch of space units. Looks like they're going to aggression kill our Boba leader. That's my guess. Draw a card, kill Boba leader. Yep. We'll just play a Gideon. And then we will set up for next turn. They can't deploy IG still. It just dies to Bosk. So, I mean, opponent could play this like, I gotta kill your unit. I'm gonna, kind of stall out the game. But, I mean, we just have so much more powerful things to be doing that I'm really not worried about anything that our opponent is gonna do. They are passing. Okay, we'll attack it with Boba. They're passing because they don't want to deploy IG and just get it immediately killed by Bosk is what my guess is. And so we're going to attack in for Boba for 3 damage. And if they pass again, we're just going to take initiative. And this is just not a winning play from our opponent. They just... they're... yeah, sure. We'll take initiative. We're gonna resource the I think one of the takedowns, and we're just gonna probably start off the round by attacking in with Boba Fett. I don't really see what our opponent's plan here is. I think they're just like super far out of the game. Maybe they're gonna try to go for this like massive like deploy 4 units type turn, but we can just kill their IG, kill off power with Power of the Dark Side, kill off with Takedown. We can Cunning something. It's just going to be a really bad situation from our opponent. This game's taking the longest game when it should be the fastest, but I think our opponent's got to think through a lot of different things going on. So just attack it with Boba here. And let's see what our opponent has. Aggression. Okay, they're going to try to kill off Bosk. Sure. Sure thing. Again, playing the more controlling role does not suit our opponent. We're going to attack in with Gideon. If they deploy IG, we can power the dark side. If they deploy some other unit to protect IG, we take down and then power the dark side. We just are in such a amazing position right now. We could even take down IG-88 if we want to. I think takedown's a little bit more valuable in this matchup as they basically have all units that can be takedown. So, Death Star Stormtrooper. Sure. Just power the dark side in that. And give an experience token over to, I think, Gideon, since Boba Fett could still be aggressioned away or open fired away. See what they've got. Jedha Agitator. Okay, we're going to take down that. Put an experience token over on Boba Fett. And now if they deploy IG, sure, they could hit us for 5, but we're going to take initiative, kill IG, get another experience token. So as I mentioned earlier, like, we are just so far ahead because our opponent decided to play this like longer controlling game, which they really cannot. They needed to not pass. And that turn 2, really, when they had 3 resources open, they needed to deploy something. Even though it's like really bad if I flip a Greedo, like they end up in this spot if they don't, and they're just going to lose really slowly. So it's kind of unfortunate. I just thought the IG in particular can struggle a lot, but this is exactly the type of situation that you end up being in. And we have a Cunning to potentially get 4 damage in, and yep, we're going to claim initiative here. They can hit us for 5, sure. Not too bad at all. They might even kill Boba Fett, and if they do, like, woo, we get another experience token, and We get a 7-powered Gideon into a strafing gunship and a cunning. Like, we are sitting pretty, I'll say that much. They're gonna attack our base for 5, I imagine. What are you doing, opponent? Yep, they hit our base for 5. And yep, we have another Gideon here. I think we just resource a Death Trooper. I think keeping another Gideon around makes a lot of sense. And I'm just going to kill off their... I mean, we could even just potentially just hit their base. And I think that's actually instead what I'm going to do. As hitting their IG, while it does control the board, like, we just have 10 power on the battlefield. We have a huge life total advantage. We have cunning in hand. So if they like decide to, I don't know, do something crazy here, we could potentially just exhaust some units, +4/+0, and then just sit pretty. But like, who cares about IG at this point? Like, who cares? Opponents in the tank, though, they are taking a little while for their turns. They need to figure out a way out of this, and I just don't think there is a way out of it, to be honest. I mean, I could have traded with IG, and that might be that might be something that I should have done instead. But I just don't think it's actually extremely relevant in this board. As in red, I mean, what do you have to really get a lot of damage in, like hasted wise, like immediately? Not much. Like Gorilla Attack Pod, and exactly what I thought. They're gonna trade with my Boba Fett. And that is just not a good look for our opponent. Like, if they are using their IG to trade with our Boba Fett, they are in a really rough spot. In red, I mean, they could have Ruthless Raider, which is a decent one, right? That's like 6 cost. That's going to do some damage to our base, deal 2 to strafing gunship. But we have a 7-powered Gideon on the battlefield. There's just not really much you could do about that in red. I mean, you could do an aggression, deal 4, defeat 2 upgrades, as they have that 3rd aggression in the deck still. It turns the Gideon into a 5-powered unit, 5/2. I mean, even then, though, like, that's just miserable. They don't have any pressure on the battlefield. We have another Gideon in hand. Like, I don't know. This game took a long time. We are really trying to figure out our turns here. But Imperial Interceptor, deal 3 to strafing gunship. Sure. We're gonna claim initiative. Do what you need to do, opponent. Maybe they have double Imperial Interceptor. Totally fine with that, to be honest. They do. And we are just going to see what we draw. We can cunning, +4/+0, exhaust 2 units. Kill them. If they have an aggression, they live. But then we just take initiative and we kill them next turn. Not sure what our opponent's thinking about when they have 0 resources. I think they might just be lagging, to be honest. I mean, maybe that's what's happening. But they have 0 resources. Don't know what they could be thinking about here. But takedown, power of the dark side. Maybe I resource the Gideon. I don't know. I think I like Gideon in this spot, as it's like another way to kind of put on pressure if our Gideon dies. I'm going to go for the cunning play. There's a chance that they do something to not, get killed this turn, but it saves us 6 points of damage even if we don't kill them this turn, and it gives us lethal on board. And if they do, aggression, we still get in for 8 damage. Like, all right, not even 8 damage, it's 9 damage. So they're in trouble. Let's just say that. Let's see what you got, opponent. Let's see what you resource. Come on. Come on. They're playing Jedha Agitator, which is a really, really awful card. To be honest. I'm not a huge fan. They have the double aggression draw, though. That's pretty good. They got Wolf going on. They got the Death Star Stormtroopers. They're playing the Cantina Braggart. I like it. Let's exhaust units. Buff unit. Buff. Exhaust. Nice, they say. Yeah, I mean, cunning's good. And that was a 16-minute game. we only played for 2 minutes and 49 seconds. That was a really slow game. We're gonna play one more, even though it was a really slow game, but we're gonna see if we can find a little bit more of a competitive deck, I'd say. So I was gonna wrap up with another game, but I couldn't find anyone playing some more meta decks, and well, the video is super long already, so hopefully you guys enjoy what we did play through. There's a lot of gameplay. That last game ended up lasting way too long for the recording, but you know, we're gonna keep it in there. We're gonna play some. We're gonna keep the IG red in there. It was a cool looking deck, to say the least. But this one is pretty sweet, and I definitely recommend you giving it a try. If you're gonna fight against those control decks, that's where the sideboard plan really shows itself. The Spark Rebellions do a lot of work, and because you can deploy them a little bit earlier than like Iden Blue can, for example, or Vader Blue can, you actually have a decent advantage against them because you can get their own Spark Rebellions or their restocks or their vigilances 2 turns ahead of what they can do. And that's really, really important, as well, restock is the key card, as well as vigilance, the key card in a lot of those matchups. Also, like Avengers and stuff can also, you know, be relevant in some cases. But as you saw, we can also assume the beatdown roll and just kill our opponent really, really quickly. Fett's Fire Spray, 5 damage hasted, is really, really important. Immediately readying and just hitting your opponent can do some major things. And of course, you know, Gideon with Boba when you're against those aggro matchups, whew, that does some major work as well. So hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll see you all for the next one.